Amy Carter stood at her station on the bridge of the GDC Horizon's edge, watching the stars move past the view screen. She was small compared to the other officers around her, at 5 feet 4 inches, with her red hair tied back tight. She looked young next to the alien crew members. The bridge was busy with different sounds. The Thraxians made clicking noises when they talked to each other. Their bug-like eyes could see things humans could not. The tall Valdorians hummed in musical tones that hurt human ears if you listened too long. The rock-like Gornathi barely spoke at all, but when they did, their voices sounded like grinding stone. Amy was the junior tactical officer. She had been on the ship for only 3 months. Most of the alien crew still looked at her like she was a child playing with grown-up toys. Even some of the human crew thought she was too small and too young for her job. Commander Jake Morrison was different. He was Amy's boss, and the only one who really listened to her ideas. He had been fighting in space for 15 years and knew that good ideas could come from anywhere. The ship's captain was High Singer Velthera, a Valdorian whose voice could shatter glass when she was angry. She ran the ship well, but she followed all the old rules of space combat. She did not like new ideas, especially from humans. Amy had studied every battle report she could find. She read about tactics from 100 different worlds. While other officers played cards in their free time, Amy ran combat simulations on her personal computer. She saw patterns that others missed. The alarm sounded across the bridge. Red lights flashed and everyone moved to their battle stations. Amy's heart started beating faster. This was what she had trained for. "Distress signal coming in," called out the communications officer, a Thraxian named Click Sound of Rain. "Civilian transport under attack, 3 enemy ships." Captain Velthera stood up from her chair. "Set course for the signal. All crew to battle stations." Amy looked at her screen. The enemy ships were Keth raiders. The Keth had broken away from the Coalition 6 months ago. Now they attacked anyone they could find. They were strong fighters, but they always followed the same battle plans their grandfathers had used. The civilian ship was called Lucky Star. It carried 500 people from the mining colonies back to their home worlds. The Keth ships were destroying the escape pods one by one. Amy could see the small lights going out on her screen. Each light was a pod full of people. 3 Keth destroyers," reported the sensor officer. "They have heavy weapons and strong shields." Commander Morrison looked at Amy's screen. "What do you think, Carter?" Amy studied the enemy formation. The Keth ships were spread out in a triangle around the transport. It looked like a standard attack pattern, but something was wrong. "Sir, I think it's a trap," Amy said quietly. Captain Velthera heard her. "Explain yourself, Lieutenant." Amy felt all eyes on the bridge turned to her. The alien officers looked annoyed that a junior human was speaking during a battle briefing. "The Keth ships are too spread out," Amy said. "If they just wanted to destroy the transport, they would stay close together. But they're positioned like they're waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" asked the captain. "For us," Amy replied. "I think there are more Keth ships hidden nearby. When we move in to save the transport, they'll attack us from behind." The Valdorian captain made a sound like wind through broken glass. It was how her people showed they disagreed. "The Keth are raiders, not tacticians," she said. "They attack with brute force. You are seeing patterns that do not exist." Commander Morrison stepped forward. "Captain Carter has been studying Keth tactics for months. Maybe we should listen to her idea." "What would you do differently?" the captain asked Amy. Amy took a deep breath. "We split our forces. Send half our fighters around the long way to check for hidden ships. Use our main guns to create a distraction, while a small team rescues the people in the escape pods." The bridge went quiet. The alien officers looked at each other. Amy could tell they thought her plan was crazy. "Absolutely not," said the captain. "We will use standard rescue formation. All ships advance together. We protect each other and overwhelm the enemy with superior firepower." Amy wanted to argue, but she was just a lieutenant. She watched as the Horizon's Edge and its escort ships moved toward the trap she knew was waiting for them. The battle started just as Amy had feared. The Coalition ships moved in formation toward the Keth raiders. The Keth seemed to retreat, drawing the rescue ships deeper into their trap. Then it happened. 6 more Keth ships appeared from behind a large asteroid. They had been hiding there, waiting. Now the coalition ships were surrounded. "Ambush!" shouted the tactical officer. "Multiple enemy contacts." The bridge shook as enemy fire hit their shields. Amy held onto her station as the ship turned hard to the left. Outside the view screen, she could see the flashes of weapons fire and the explosion of ships. "Shields at 60%, called out the engineering officer. "Return fire," ordered the captain. Amy watched her screen as the battle unfolded. The coalition ships were trapped between 2 groups of enemies. Their formation was broken. Ships were taking damage and falling behind. Commander Morrison appeared at Amy's station. "Carter, I need options now." Amy's fingers flew over her controls. She had been running this exact scenario in her head since the battle started. "Sir, we need to break their formation. If we concentrate all our fire on the lead ship in the second group, we can punch through their line and escape." "Do it," Morrison ordered. Amy sent the targeting data to the weapons officer. The Horizon's Edge and 2 escort ships focused all their weapons on 1 Keth destroyer. Under the combined fire, the enemy ship's shields failed, and it exploded. "All ships, follow the Horizon's Edge through the gap," Morrison commanded. The coalition ships raced through the opening Amy had created. Behind them, the Keth ships tried to follow, but they were too slow to catch up. As they reached safe distance, Amy counted their losses. 2 escort ships were badly damaged. 1 had lost half its crew. The Lucky Star was gone, along with most of its escape pods. The bridge was quiet as they headed back to base. Captain Velthera sat in her chair, staring at the view screen. She had not spoken since the battle ended. Amy stayed at her station, running damage reports and casualty lists. She felt sick knowing that people had died because no one had listened to her warning. She had seen the trap coming, but she had not been able to convince anyone to avoid it. Later that night, Amy sat in her small quarters looking at the battle recordings on her computer. She watched the enemy movements over and over, looking for new patterns. She studied how the Keth had set their trap and how they might do it differently next time. She would be ready for them. Next time, she would find a way to make them listen. Next time, she would save those people. Amy Carter did not know it yet, but she had just taken her first step toward becoming a legend. The Keth had noticed the human who broke their perfect ambush. They would remember her name. In the darkness of her quarters, Amy kept working. She had battles to fight and people to save, and she would never again let anyone ignore a trap she could see coming. 6 months had passed since the disaster at Lucky Star. Amy Carter now wore the gold bars of a senior tactical officer on her uniform. Commander Morrison had been transferred to Fleet Command, and Amy had taken his place on the Horizon's Edge. The promotion felt good, but it came with a heavy weight. Every day, Amy remembered the people who had died because no one listened to her warning. She had promised herself it would never happen again. Amy spent her free time in the tactical simulation room. She created dozens of battle scenarios, testing new ideas that broke all the old rules. The computer called her methods irregular and against standard doctrine. Amy called them effective. The Keth raids had gotten worse. They were smarter now, using stolen coalition technology to upgrade their ships. They hit fast and disappeared before help could arrive. Worse, they had started targeting civilian ships carrying families and children. Amy studied every Keth attack, looking for patterns. She noticed they always followed their ancient warrior codes. They announced their attacks. They gave enemies time to surrender. They never retreated once they started fighting. To the Keth, these were signs of honor. To Amy, they were weaknesses to exploit. The alarm sounded across the ship. Amy rushed to the bridge, her heart pounding. Captain Velthara was already there, her tall form standing rigid at the command station. "Report," Amy called out as she took her position. "Major Keth offensive at Kepler 442b, announced the communications officer. "The mining world is under full attack. Orbital defenses are failing." Amy pulled up the tactical display. Her stomach dropped. 12 Keth heavy cruisers were attacking the planet. The small coalition defense force had been overwhelmed in minutes. "Evacuation is underway," continued the communications officer. "But the transport ships are sitting targets. They need time to load civilians and escape." Captain Velthara studied the display. "We are part of a task force of 6 ships. Against 12 Keth cruisers, we have little chance." Amy looked at the numbers. The Kith commander was war leader Vash Korthak, a famous warrior who had never lost a battle. His ships were arranged in the traditional Keth formation, a wall of firepower that would advance slowly and destroy everything in its path. "Standard. Coalition doctrine calls for a frontal assault," said the captain. "We will charge their line and break through with superior firepower." Amy felt her hands shake. She had seen this before. The coalition would attack with honor and courage, and they would lose. The transports would be destroyed. Thousands of civilians would die. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "I request permission to speak." The bridge went silent. Every officer turned to look at her. Amy could feel their eyes judging her, waiting to see if the young human would make another wild suggestion. "What is your assessment, Senior Tactical Officer Carter?" the captain asked. Amy took a deep breath. "A frontal assault will fail. The Keth have more ships and stronger weapons. They are expecting us to attack their formation directly." "Then, what do you suggest?" Amy called up her own tactical display. For weeks, she had been developing new strategies based on human military history. Ancient generals who had won battles against impossible odds by refusing to fight the way their enemies expected. "We split up," Amy said. "The main fleet attacks from the front to get their attention. But we take a squadron of fighters and hit them from behind. Not their main ships, but their supply vessels and communication arrays." The alien officers made sounds of disapproval. The Thraxian weapons officer clicked his mandibles in what Amy had learned was disgust. "You suggest we attack supply ships while civilians die?" he asked. "That is cowardice." "No," Amy replied firmly. "It is tactics. The Keth formation is strong, but it needs constant communication to work. If we cut their communications and disrupt their supply lines, the formation will collapse." Captain Velthara listened without speaking. Amy could see her thinking, weighing the options. "Your plan requires us to run from direct combat," the captain said finally. "The Keth will call us cowards." "Let them," Amy said. "Dead heroes cannot save civilians." The captain was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the bridge crew waited. Amy could hear her own heartbeat in the silence. "Very well," Captain Velthara said at last. "You will take 3 fighter squadrons and attempt your flanking maneuver. But if you fail, those transports will be destroyed." Amy felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. 36 fighters and their pilots were now her responsibility. She could not afford to be wrong. The battle began as Amy had predicted. The coalition task force charged toward the Keth formation. The enemy ships opened fire with their massive weapons, lighting up space with deadly energy beams. The coalition ships fired back, their smaller guns barely scratching the Keth armor. Amy led her fighters around the long way, using the planet's gravity to hide their approach. She watched the main battle on her screen, her heart sinking as she saw coalition ships taking heavy damage. "Target the communication relay," Amy ordered her pilots. "Hit it fast and get out." The fighters dove toward the Keth rear guard. Amy had chosen her target carefully. The communication ship was lightly armored but heavily defended. It sat in the center of the Keth formation, protected by their best warriors. "Incoming fighters," shouted one of her pilots. "Keth interceptors." Amy's squadron scattered as enemy fighters attacked, the space around them filled with weapons fire and explosions. Amy twisted her fighter through the deadly dance, her hands steady on the controls. "Stay focused on the mission," she called out. "Hit the relay and fall back." Amy's fighter broke through the enemy screen. The communication ship filled her targeting display. She fired everything she had, watching her missiles streak toward the target. The ship's shields flared and died. Explosions rippled across its hull. "Communication relay destroyed," reported one of her pilots. Amy switched to the next target. "Supply convoy 2 kilometers to port, take them out." The fighters swept through the Keth rear area like a storm. They destroyed fuel tankers, ammunition ships, and repair vessels. Amy's pilots fought with desperate courage, knowing that every target they destroyed weakened the enemy formation. "Carter," Captain Velthara's voice crackled through the radio. "The Keth formation is breaking up. They cannot coordinate their attacks." Amy smiled grimly. Without communication, the Keth ships were fighting individually instead of as a unit. Their perfect formation was falling apart. "All fighters, regroup on me," Amy ordered. "We go after their command ship." War leader Korthak's flagship was a massive vessel, twice the size of any coalition ship. But without support from his formation, it was vulnerable. Amy led her remaining fighters in a desperate attack on the ship's weapon systems. The Keth commander tried to restore order to his fleet, but it was too late. The coalition ships had broken through his scattered formation and were advancing on the planet. The evacuation transports were escaping to safety. As the Keth fleet began to retreat, Amy heard something that made her blood run cold. War leader Korthak was broadcasting on all frequencies, speaking in the ancient Keth language. "What is he saying?" Amy asked her translator. The computer's voice was emotionless. "He is placing a blood price on the head of the one who dishonored his fleet. He calls you Girak Thul, the shadow that strikes without honor." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. In Keth culture, being given a name by an enemy was both an honor and a curse. It meant they would never forget you. It meant they would never stop hunting you. "Congratulations, Senior Tactical Officer Carter," said Captain Velthara over the radio. "You have saved Kepler 442b and earned the respect of your enemies." Amy looked at the retreating Keth ships on her screen. She had won her first major victory, but at a cost. The Keth would remember her name now. They would study her tactics and prepare for her methods. As her fighters returned to the horizon's edge, Amy realized that her war was just beginning. She was no longer just another coalition officer. She was Girak Thul, the shadow that strikes without honor. The young woman who had once been ignored and dismissed had earned her first code name. But names carried power, and power carried responsibility. Amy Carter would have to live up to the legend she had created, whether she wanted to or not. The evacuation was complete. The civilians were safe. And somewhere in the depths of space, war leader Korthak was planning his revenge against the human who had shamed him in battle. Amy Carter had won her first great victory, but she had also made her first great enemy. Commander Amy Carter stood on the bridge of her new ship, the Nightfall. 2 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler 442b, and everything had changed. Amy was no longer the young officer who had to fight to be heard. Now, admirals across, the coalition asked for her advice. The Nightfall was a fast attack cruiser, built for the kind of warfare Amy had made famous. It was smaller than most warships, but faster and more maneuverable. Amy had picked every member of her crew personally. They were soldiers who understood that winning meant more than following old rules. Her first officer was Lieutenant Commander Pete Sullivan, a former Marine who had fought ground battles on 6 different worlds. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with scars on his hands from close combat. Pete understood that sometimes the best plan was the one your enemy would never expect. "Commander, we have a priority message from Fleet Command," announced the communications officer, Ensign Lisa Martinez. She was young, barely out of the academy, but she had volunteered to serve on Amy's ship despite the danger. Amy nodded. "Put it through." Admiral Hayes appeared on the main screen. His face was grim, the way it always was when he had bad news to deliver. "Commander Carter, the Keth have launched a surprise attack on New Geneva. The capital world is under siege. We need the Nightfall there immediately." Amy felt her stomach tighten. New Geneva was the heart of the coalition government. If it fell, the war would be over. "How many ships do they have?" Amy asked. 47 Keth warships plus an unknown number of mercenary vessels. They appeared out of nowhere and overwhelmed our outer defenses in minutes. Amy studied the tactical data as it came through. The attack was too well coordinated to be just a Keth operation. Someone had been planning this for months. "Admiral, this looks like syndicate work," Amy said. "The Keth have hired professional mercenaries." Admiral Hayes nodded grimly. "Our intelligence agrees. The attack is being led by someone called the Architect." He has studied your tactics and developed counters for each one. Amy felt a chill. For 2 years, she had stayed ahead of the Keth by constantly changing her methods. Her hit-and-run attacks had become legendary. Her ship appeared where enemies least expected it, struck hard, and vanished before they could respond. But now someone had figured out how to stop her. "We will be there in 6 hours," Amy promised. The journey to New Geneva felt like the longest of Amy's life. She spent the time studying everything she could about the Syndicate. They were criminals and mercenaries from dozens of different species. Unlike the honor-bound Keth, they had no rules they would not break. When the nightfall arrived at New Geneva, Amy saw a battle unlike anything she had ever witnessed. The planet's orbital defenses were in ruins. Coalition ships were scattered, and fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. The sky above the capital world was filled with fire and death. "Take us into the battle," Amy ordered. "All weapons ready." The nightfall dove into the fight. Amy tried her usual tactics, leading her ship in a fast attack on the enemy's communication vessels. But the Syndicate ships were ready for her. They had set up a trap specifically designed to catch fast-moving attackers. "Incoming missiles," shouted the weapons officer. "They were waiting for us." The ship shook as enemy fire struck their shields. Amy gripped her command chair as the nightfall twisted through space, trying to avoid the deadly trap. "Shields at 40%, reported the engineering officer. Amy realized with growing horror that her reputation had become a weakness. The enemy knew exactly how she would attack, because she had done it so many times before. They had turned her own success against her. "All ships, this is the nightfall," Amy broadcast. "Change formation. Do not use standard attack patterns." But it was too late. The Coalition fleet was being torn apart. Amy watched as ship after ship was destroyed by enemies who seemed to know exactly what they would do next. "Commander," Pete Sullivan said quietly, "we need to get out of here. This is a massacre." Amy wanted to retreat, but she could not abandon the other Coalition ships. She watched her tactical display as more friendly contacts disappeared. Each lost ship meant hundreds of dead crew members. "Lisa, open a channel to all Coalition ships," Amy ordered. Ensign Martinez worked at her station. "Channel open, Commander. All Coalition vessels, this is Commander Carter. Break off your attacks and regroup at coordinates 77 Alpha. We need a new plan." As the surviving Coalition ships pulled back, Amy studied the enemy formation. The Syndicate fleet was perfectly positioned to counter every move the Coalition might make. Someone had studied not just Amy's tactics but the entire Coalition way of fighting. "Commander, I have an idea," said Pete Sullivan. "What if we do something completely unexpected?" "What do you mean?" Pete pointed to the tactical display. "They expect us to attack their weak points. What if we attack their strongest position instead?" Amy looked at the display. The enemy command ship was surrounded by their heaviest defenses. It would be suicide to attack it directly. "That is insane," Amy said. "We would never survive." "Maybe," Pete replied, "but they would never expect it. And if we could capture their command codes, we could turn their own ships against them." Amy thought about the plan. It was dangerous beyond belief, but it was also the kind of move that no tactical computer would ever suggest. It was purely human in its reckless courage. "Lisa, I need you to download all our tactical data to the secure storage," Amy said. The young ensign looked confused. "Commander, we are going to ram the enemy command ship. If we survive, we will need that data to coordinate the counterattack." The bridge went silent. Amy could see the fear in her crew's eyes. She was asking them to sacrifice their ship and possibly their lives for a plan that might not work. "All hands, this is the commander," Amy announced over the ship's communication system. "We are going to attempt a boarding action on the enemy flagship. It is extremely dangerous. Anyone who wants to transfer to another ship should do so now." Nobody moved. Amy felt a surge of pride in her crew. They trusted her, even when she was asking them to follow her into what looked like certain death. The nightfall accelerated toward the enemy command ship. Amy watched the tactical display as dozens of enemy weapons turned toward them. The space around her ship filled with deadly fire. Shields failing, reported the engineering officer. Hull breach on deck 3, called out another voice. Amy felt the ship shudder as enemy fire tore through their armor. But the Nightfall kept moving, its engines pushing it forward even as systems failed all around them. Brace for impact, Amy shouted. The Nightfall struck the enemy command ship with tremendous force. Amy was thrown from her command chair as the two vessels locked together in a twisted embrace of metal and fire. "Boarding parties, move out," Pete Sullivan ordered. Amy led a team of Marines through the damaged corridors of the enemy ship. They fought their way past syndicate guards and alien mercenaries, pushing deeper into the vessel. The air was thick, with smoke and the smell of burning metal. In the enemy command center, Amy found herself face to face with war leader Korthak himself. The Keth warrior had been directing the battle from the syndicate flagship. His eyes burned with hatred when he saw her. "Girak Thul," he growled. "You have come to die with honor at last." "I have come to stop you from killing innocent people," Amy replied. The battle that followed was both physical and mental. Korthak was stronger than Amy, but she was faster and more desperate. As they fought, she tried to convince him that continuing the battle would only lead to more death. "Your fleet is trapped," Amy said, as she dodged his massive fist. "Coalition, reinforcements are coming. If you withdraw now, your warriors can live to fight another day." Korthak paused, his warrior's instincts recognizing the truth in her words. Around them, the sound of battle was fading as coalition forces retook the command ship. "You fight with courage, even when you have no hope of victory," Korthak said finally. "That is worthy of respect." The Keth commander ordered his fleet to withdraw. As the enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, Amy collapsed against a bulkhead, exhausted and wounded. Later, as the coalition fleet regrouped, Amy stood in the ruins of the Nightfall's bridge. The ship could be repaired, but it would never be the same. Neither would Amy. She had lost too many good people in the battle. "Commander," Lisa Martinez said softly, "we are receiving a message from the Keth fleet." Amy nodded wearily. "Put it through." Korthak's image appeared on the damaged screen. "Girak Thul, you have earned a new name today. My people will know you as Vorthak Mel, the ghost who walks between deaths. You have shown that humans can fight with honor, even when they use tactics we do not understand." Amy looked at the Keth warrior who had become her greatest enemy. In a strange way, she understood him better than most of her own allies. They were both soldiers trying to protect their people in a galaxy that seemed determined to destroy them. "Until we meet again, Vorthak Mel," Korthak said, and the transmission ended. Amy Carter had earned her second codename, but the cost had been terrible. The young officer who had once sought only to prove herself was gone. In her place stood a commander who understood that every victory came with a price that had to be paid in blood and sacrifice. 2 years had passed since the Battle of New Geneva. Commodore Amy Carter now commanded an entire task force of fast attack ships. Her methods had spread throughout the coalition fleet. Young officers studied her tactics in military academies across known space. But Amy herself had changed. The losses at New Geneva had marked her deeply. She was still brilliant, still capable of seeing patterns others missed, but there was a coldness in her eyes now. Some said she was becoming too much like her enemies. Amy stood in the war room aboard her flagship, the Retribution, studying holographic displays of ship movements. Her task force consisted of 12 vessels, each one crewed by officers trained in her unconventional methods. They were the best the Coalition had to offer. "Commodore, priority alert from Earth Defense Command," announced Captain Dan Rogers, her new chief of staff. He was a steady man who had served with Amy since the New Geneva battle. Amy looked up from the displays. "What is it?" "The Keth have launched their final offensive. They are attacking Earth itself." Amy felt the blood drain from her face. Earth was humanity's homeworld, the birthplace of every human in the galaxy. If it fell, humanity would be scattered and broken. "How many ships?" she asked. 67 Keth warships supported by precursor technology, Rogers replied grimly. "The Earth Defense Fleet has been destroyed. We are humanity's last hope." Amy studied the tactical data as it streamed in. The Keth fleet was massive, but that was not what worried her. The precursor weapons were ancient technology, far more advanced than anything the Coalition possessed. Ships equipped with such weapons could destroy entire fleets. Where did they get precursor technology? Amy asked. Intelligence reports indicate a rogue faction of the precursors themselves has joined the Keth, Rogers said. They believe humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to survive. Amy closed her eyes for a moment. She had spent years fighting the Keth, earning their respect and fear. Now it seemed that respect had convinced even older species that humans were a threat to galactic peace. Set course for Earth, Amy ordered. Maximum speed. The journey to Earth took 4 days. Amy spent that time preparing for what might be her final battle. She studied every piece of data about precursor technology, looking for weaknesses that might not exist. She also spent time writing letters to the families of her crew members. It was a habit she had developed after New Geneva. If she was going to lead people into battle, she would take responsibility for their lives. When the task force arrived at Earth's solar system, Amy saw a sight that broke her heart. The beautiful blue world where humanity had first looked up at the stars was surrounded by wreckage. The orbital defense stations were gone. The space elevators that connected Earth to its orbital cities had been cut and were falling toward the planet. The Keth fleet is positioned in the asteroid belt, reported the sensor officer. They are using the asteroids as cover. Amy had expected this. For months she had been preparing the asteroid belt as a trap for any enemy that tried to attack Earth. She had hidden weapons and sensors among the rocks, turning the entire belt into a massive defensive position. But the precursor technology was too powerful. Her preparations were not enough. Commodore, we are receiving a transmission from the Keth fleet, announced the communications officer. Put it through. War Leader Korthak appeared on the main screen. He looked older than Amy remembered, with new scars across his face and arms. But his eyes still burned with the fire of a warrior. Vorthak, Mel, he said in his deep voice. We meet for the last time. It does not have to be this way, Amy replied. Earth has never attacked Keth worlds. We can find peace. Korthak shook, his massive head. The precursors have shown us the future. Humanity will spread across the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything in its path. You must be stopped now, while it is still possible. Amy felt a surge of anger. And what gives you the right to decide humanity's fate? The right of the strong over the weak, Korthak replied. But I offer you honor in death. Face me in single combat. If you win, Earth will be spared. If you lose, humanity dies with dignity. Amy knew it was a trap, but it was also the only chance Earth had. Coalition reinforcements were still days away. I accept your challenge, Amy said. But not single combat between warriors. A battle of tactics between fleets. Winner takes all. Korthak smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Agreed. You have always been clever, Vorthak Mel. Let us see if cleverness can defeat superior firepower. What followed was the greatest tactical duel in galactic history. Amy and Korthak commanded their fleets like chess pieces, each trying to outthink the other. Every move Amy made, Korthak had a counter. Every trap she set, he found a way around. The battle raged through the asteroid belt for hours. Amy used every trick she had learned, every unconventional tactic she had developed. But Korthak had studied her methods for years. He was prepared for her surprises. Commodore, we have lost 4 ships, reported Captain Rogers. The precursor weapons are tearing through our hulls like paper. Amy watched her tactical display as more of her ships were destroyed. She was losing, and she knew it. Soon, there would be nothing left between the Keth fleet and Earth. Then Amy realized something that made her smile for the first time in months. Korthak's greatest strength was also his weakness. His adherence to Keth honor codes meant he would never break his word, even to win a battle. All ships, new formation, Amy ordered. We are going to force Korthak to choose between victory and honor. Amy led her remaining ships in a desperate charge toward the Keth flagship. It looked like a suicide attack, the kind of move a defeated commander might make in desperation. But Amy had positioned her ships carefully, using the asteroids, to hide her true intention. At the last moment, her ship scattered. Instead of attacking the flagship, they surrounded a group of Keth support vessels filled with wounded warriors from previous battles. "Korthak," Amy broadcast on all frequencies. "I have your wounded at my mercy. Surrender now, or I will destroy them." The Keth commander appeared on her screen, his face twisted with rage and anguish. By Keth law, he was required to protect wounded warriors above all else. But destroying Amy's ships would mean certain victory in the war. For long moments, Korthak said nothing. Amy could see the battle raging in his mind. Victory or honor, conquest or duty. Finally, Korthak spoke. "You fight without honor, Vorthak Mel, but you fight to protect your people as I fight to protect mine. I cannot fault you for that." The Keth fleet began to withdraw. As they disappeared into hyperspace, Korthak sent one final message. "You have earned a new name, worthy enemy. My people will remember you as Melthak Vor, the Deathbringer who honors the fallen. You have shown that even in war, there can be respect between enemies." Amy watched the last Keth ship vanish from her sensors. Earth was safe, but the cost had been terrible. Half her task force was gone, and thousands of good people had died. As coalition reinforcements finally arrived, Amy stood alone on the bridge of the Retribution. She had saved humanity's homeworld and earned her third codename, but she felt no joy in victory. Later, in her quarters, Amy wrote letters to the families of those who had died in the battle. She signed each one simply, "Amy Carter, Officer." Of the fleet, the young lieutenant who had once been ignored and dismissed was gone forever. In her place stood a legend whose very name struck fear into the hearts of her enemies. But legends came with a price, and Amy had paid it in full. She looked out at the stars through her viewport, thinking about all the battles yet to come. There would always be new enemies, new threats to face, but she would face them with the same determination that had made her famous. Amy Carter had become exactly what the galaxy needed her to be, a protector who would sacrifice everything to keep humanity safe. She was the Deathbringer who honors the fallen, and she would carry that burden for the rest of her life. The war was over, but Amy's story would live forever. In military academies across the galaxy, young officers would study her tactics and try to understand how a small human woman had changed the nature of warfare itself, but they would never truly understand the cost of her success. That was a burden Amy would carry alone in the silence of space, surrounded by the stars her people had claimed as their own.